Okay, with Learning Objective 4, we are discussing the effectiveness of the Emancipation Proclamation and its significance. So Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation was purely a military measure, as he used his powers as commander-in-chief of the armed forces to free. And this is significant. Only the slaves in the states that had seceded. The act said nothing about slavery in the states that remained loyal to the Union. So these states right here is where he's declaring, the ones in green is what he's declaring to be free of slavery. Basically, anyone who's a slave there is officially free with his proclamation. So Lincoln was confronted with the task of not alienating the border states and the Northern Democrats, while at the same time satisfying his radical Republican supporters and reaping the diplomatic rewards of an anti-slavery policy. So the peculiar wording of the Emancipation Proclamation was his answer to the problem. The proclamation declared that all persons held as slaves within the insurgent states, with the exception of Tennessee, southern Louisiana, and parts of Virginia, then within the Union lines, are and henceforth shall be free. So on the day it was issued, the proclamation actually freed a grand total of 0 slaves, since it only applied to areas not under Union control and exempts the 4 loyal states that. So the Confederacy is going to view this proclamation as basically confirming what it always suspected of Lincoln, as hypocritical and an anti-Southern abolitionist. But what's interesting about the Emancipation Proclamation is it's part and parcel of the dynamic of the war. The Civil War itself is what is freeing slaves. So as Union soldiers are infiltrating into the South, slaves are running towards those Union soldiers, and therefore they are becoming free, right? And so there was a little bit of controversy early on in the war about what to do with contraband, these human beings who are running away from the plantations that they live on. But as time went on and as more and more slaves are running away, it became clear that they just had to emancipate these people. And so Abraham Lincoln is just basically putting a document to this dynamic with the Emancipation Proclamation. And the proclamation can be regarded as a milestone on the road to the final freedom as expressed in the 13th Amendment of 1865. So it was basically it set precedent and got a discussion going for the possibility for the debate and for the final ratification of the 13th Amendment, which is the amendment that officially abolishes slavery in the United States, the land of the home and of the free. So as mentioned, Lincoln was quite conscious of the necessity to retain support of both the border states and Northern Democrats. He wisely refrained from pressing, he shrewdly refrained from pressing the anti-slavery issue prematurely, although he did sign several confiscation acts that were passed in Congress between 1861 and 1862. So in August 6th of 1861, this act provided that when slaves were engaged in hostile military service, all owners' claims to the labor of such slaves were forfeited. So if slaves were used for the war effort in any way, digging ditches, graves, cooking in the medical services as soldiers, the owners of those slaves would forfeit their right to those slaves. On April 16th of 1862, slavery in the District of Columbia, the nation's capital, was abolished with compensation to the owners. So emancipation in the territories without compensation was provided by another act on June 19th of the same year. this act challenged part of the Dred Scott decision of 1857. So on July 17, 1862, another confiscation act was provided that if anyone committed treason, his slaves were free. As to all persons supporting the rebellion, it proclaimed that their slaves should be, quote, forever free of their servitude and not again held as slaves. So what must be noted about these acts, the insurance of the Emancipation Proclamation by Lincoln, and the manner in which it seized the popular imagination, caused these emancipatory acts, the confiscation acts of Congress, to be almost overlooked. And it is seldom realized that before Lincoln's proclamation, the Emancipation Proclamation, was issued in September of 1862, Congress had done as much, at least on paper, as was done by the proclamation. Basically, the confiscation acts and the Emancipation Proclamation are saying the same things. So in many ways, because of the ineffectiveness of the legislation of these acts and the lack of coordination between the president and Congress, Lincoln, in issuing his edict, the Emancipation Proclamation, acted as if Congress had done nothing and as if he were attacking the problem anew. The proclamation did not meet with everyone's approval, to be certain, too. So this guy right here, Orville H. Browning, he was Lincoln's good friend and a strong supporter of him, pointed out that the Emancipation Proclamation was to unite and exasperate the South. It, in many ways, invigorated the morale of the Southerners who were becoming war-weary. With the Emancipation Proclamation, their commitment to the war strengthened. And, as he points out, it divided and distracted us here in the North. So all over the North, this is going to cause problems in the ranks. Mutinies would break out in the army. Basically, enlisted men were deserting from the war because they did not want to fight a war to give any kind of equality to black people. They were fighting the war in many ways. If they were fighting it willingly, a lot of people were drafted, but if they were fighting it willingly, they were fighting it for the original intent that Lincoln had laid out, which was to preserve the Union. So again, thousands and thousands of soldiers shortly after the Emancipation Proclamation is issued are deserting the army. But despite all of this, what is significant about the Emancipation Proclamation is it initiates a political conversation that will continue after the war is over, and this conversation will lead to debate, and it will lead to the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in 1865, which is the abolition of slavery in the United States. It will lead to the 14th Amendment in 1868, which guarantees citizenship for all natural-born citizens. And it will lead to the 15th Amendment in 1870, which guaranteed that any natural-born citizen in this country, that their freedom to vote would not be infringed. Plus, it's going to lead to additional civil rights legislations from 1866 all the way to the present, right? So it initiates a political discussion, debate, that continues to this day. And to highlight that, I'm going to show you a couple of videos to conclude this learning objective. And that'll conclude the series for this lecture.
By 1864, the country is soaked in the blood of its soldiers, blue and gray. By war's end, nearly 620,000 men are dead. After years of fighting, Lincoln is under incredible pressure to justify the terrible sacrifice and bloodshed. On one side, he has abolitionists clamoring to give the war a moral purpose. But Lincoln worries what freeing the slaves might do to his army. His generals advise against it.
General McClellan is telling Lincoln in no uncertain terms that white men will not fight to free black men. That if you turn this into a war about the Negro slave, then Northern armies will dissolve overnight.
Lincoln faces a dilemma. He needs the manpower black soldiers can provide, but risks losing the white soldiers if he frees the slaves. So he's careful not to reveal his intentions.
While he's publicly denying that he has any intention of moving on emancipation, privately he in fact is writing a draft of the Emancipation Proclamation.
Lincoln waits for a Union victory before proceeding. And when he finally makes the announcement, he emphasizes the practical benefits. The proclamation only frees slaves in Confederate states. It reduces the Southern workforce and adds 200,000 black recruits to Union ranks. At the same time, Lincoln begins to cast the bloodshed in a new light.
He persuaded people that there was a secondary cause to the war, that union meant liberty, that liberty would preserve the Union. It was intertwined.
Every man has a right to be equal with every other man. In this great struggle, this form of government and every form of human right is endangered if our enemies succeed.
Overnight, Lincoln redefined the war. No longer is it a war about states' rights. It becomes a war for human rights.
And I come here tonight and plead with you. Believe in yourself and believe that you're somebody. As I said to the group last night, nobody else can do this for us. No document can do this for us. No Lincolnian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for us. No Kennysonian or Johnsonian Civil Rights Bill can do this for us. If the Negro is to be free, he must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-assertive manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation.